Hi, I'm Kat Cheney, Special Projects Editor at NationSwell, here for another Google Hangout on Air featuring a service year opportunity. And today we're going to be talking about the Lutheran Volunteer Corps and the role of the faith community in advancing national service. So I'm joined by Gerald Osorto. He's the National Program Director for the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, Elizabeth Flomo, who's the Recruitment and Outreach Manager, and Drew Bongiovanni, a Corps member currently with LVC in Washington, D.C. So to kick things off, Gerald, can you tell us a little bit more about the LVC mission?
Sure. So LVC's mission is to unite a community of faith working for peace with justice, and we partner with nonprofit organizations, congregations, and other institutions across the country. We have over 130 volunteers serving, doing a number of work, and also living in community and following our core practices of community, sustainability, and social justice, and engaging spirituality and faith as they wrestle with lots of questions and tensions during their year of service.
Great, thank you. And I'm really interested to get at this question of spirituality and how that plays into what you all do and just the way the faith community is connected with service in this country. So Elizabeth, can you tell us when you're looking for, the ideal LVC candidate? I know diversity is a big push, but what unites all LVC candidates in terms of making someone the ideal fit?
I think that something that makes ideal, I think I'm coming through okay, an ideal LVC candidate is someone who is willing to explore what matters to them, because everyone has values that guide their life, and for some people that comes through as a theistic religion and some not. And what we seek to do in LVC is create space where you can talk about what matters to you and those values that guide your life. And for a lot of people, that pushes them into doing a year of service. And so giving space for that conversation about what matters and giving space to listen deeply to other people. And I would say another value that LVC candidates bring in is a willingness to allow others' truths to reflect back on how they view the world, and be willing to question your assumptions about how the world functions.
Interesting. I actually heard from someone who did the LVC program. She saw that we were going to be doing this hangout, and she reached out. Her name's Anna Ernst, and she was based in Omaha, Nebraska with LVC. And she wrote to me, spirituality is an important part of the program, but everyone approaches it differently, and that's okay. And I thought that was a really interesting reflection on how spirituality plays into everything you do. Drew, can you touch on that point? Can you first tell us a little bit about what you're doing in DC and also how spirituality is a part of your approach to service?
Yeah, absolutely. So in DC, I work with community organizers, an organization called the Washington Interfaith Network. So I actually get to engage in local politics with people who live all over the city. We do leadership development. How do we get, little old church lady, how do we help her testify to city council hearing about affordable housing because it matters to her? That's essentially the gist of what I get to do every day. And we're faith-based organization, so we work with churches all over the city and the people who attend the churches and get involved in the public sector. So it's a really interesting mishmash of different parts of life coming together. For me, spirituality was really important to me, especially the part of LVC that's intentional community, and intentional community through spirituality. How do I learn to be just a better person, a more whole person, by sharing my life with other people, and in a very spiritual way, not just practically, resourcefully, but how do I really do something that's challenging and risky? I'm fresh out of college and I don't know a lot about the world. How do I share that part of myself and be vulnerable with other people in the same position as me, also experiencing the world for the first time, and how do we see that as a spiritual experience together?
I was really drawn to one of the ways the LVC describes itself as being on this journey to an inclusive community. And part of the reason I wanted to talk with LVC this month, as we feature a service opportunity every month, is I feel like we're at a place with our country where this idea of an inclusive community and kind of coming together is more important than ever. So can you guys touch on what you mean by an inclusive community and how that is a part of the curriculum for LVC Corps members?
Sure, I can start, and I'm sure folks could add from their perspective. I mean, I think that that's a distinctive for LVC in terms of when we say inclusive community, we're not saying that we just tolerate people, but we're willing to really engage in the tensions that come with differences and really look at both systemically, like how does race impact the way that we navigate the world? How does our social location in terms of sexual orientation and gender manifests itself in how we interact with one another, but also in terms of institutions. And I think being a faith-based organization calls us to do that work. And so we're very intentional of creating ways that our volunteers can be exposed to. And one of those has been through an ongoing relationship with Crossroads, which is an anti-racism organization that does a training for our volunteers at the start of their year. And then throughout the year, our program staff integrate other ways for our volunteers to engage that conversation, both in terms of where they're coming from, but also in the nonprofits that they're working with, and really thinking, like, what does it mean for me as a recent college grad to be working alongside people that are experiencing homelessness? And what does that call me to do and think differently? And how do I relate with both those tensions within myself, but also institutionally, these things that are being created to maintain people where they're at? And so I think that the space is generated, and I think living in intentional community allows that to also happen organically because folks are engaging because of where they're at, and living together causes that need in very fascinating and interesting ways.
Now, my understanding is each of you have served as LVC core members.
Yes.
Is that correct, Gerald and Elizabeth? You were both core members before you joined the program staff?
Correct.
That's great. And I'm curious, can any of you chime in on, an LVC alum actually reached out to me and said, ask about the anti-racism training. That is a big part of what LVC is, and I was really struck by that. Can any of you talk from your perspective as core members, as someone who went through that, what all is involved?
Yeah, I can start sharing some of my experience. So I served in Lutheran Volunteer Corps as a volunteer after I graduated from St. Olaf College, and I served with the Minnesota Council of Churches Refugee Services in Minneapolis. And to reiterate what Drew and Gerald have also mentioned, a year of service with LVC involves serving at your placement, it involves your house community, and it involves the additional programming led by LVC staff. So it's that holistic program as a year of service. And so the anti-racism training for me and how we have continued it, it starts at national orientation. And my experience that year, that was the first time that I had gotten language around systemic racism, sort of going beyond an understanding of interpersonal racism, just understanding how that is built more systemically into the way that the U.S. has been shaped as a nation, and given some tools for analyzing that, and gave me tools and language, and has started a conversation that continues. I mean, that's why LVC calls it a journey to inclusive community, because it's an ongoing journey where making our hidden assumptions, bringing them to light matters. And so that's been for me, since I did LVC, and especially understanding what white privilege means and seeing where that shows up in my personal life and in the organizations I'm a part of, and what that looks like to continue to name that and not fall back into my privilege that blinds me to others' reality. That is a journey for me that started in LVC and has been cultivated ever since then, stewarded by actually a number of LVC alums that I've run into in various places.
Yeah, I really was drawn to a lot of the language on the LVC site about being inclusive and spirituality and how that connects with service. So I would encourage anyone, even if you're not the target audience for LVC, which I believe is coming out of college in terms of doing a service year with the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, I would definitely recommend taking a look at what the LVC has to say about this connection between faith and service. And I was particularly drawn to one quote on your site. It was from Parker Palmer, and it was that the quality of our active lives depends heavily on whether we assume a world of scarcity or a world of abundance, and talks about acts of generosity and community. Can any of you speak to a specific example from your time in service about the power of this connection between spirituality and service? Any moment that stands out?
I would say a moment that stands out during my year of service was going with one of my refugee clients to meet her daughter at the airport, and it was the first time that I ever danced in the airport in wild celebration of family reunification. And it was, I mean, for me, it connected to spirituality because it was them like giving thanks to God that they had their family reunited, but it was also that moment of just connectedness with other people, and it totally stands out as a moment of like awe and wonder in my service year.
Love it. Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to share something too. I spoke with the program manager at the Franklin Project at the Aspen Institute. And, the NationSwell has done a lot of coverage about the Franklin Project and their mission to make service a rite of passage in this country. And what the program manager said, her name is Yasmin Shaheen McConnell, and she actually served with the Arab American Resource Corps. That was her service year. And she said, engaging faith communities in the national service movement is critical to achieving the Franklin Project's goal of making service year a common expectation and opportunity for all young Americans. Service is a key aspect of most faith traditions, and faith-based corps have led the way in providing service opportunities for many Americans. So the question I have there is, maybe Gerald, this would be a question for you. LVC is part of a network, really, and you guys have a lot of connections and relationships with other organizations looking to advance service and this connection between faith and service. Can you guys talk about some of those partnerships or connections you have that help you do your work better across the country?
Sure, and Elizabeth could also jump in because of her role. We have such a diverse kind of network of partners that we have across the country. I mean, everything from very local grassroots organizations to nationally based organizations that have local affiliates. The other piece is also really engaging congregations that come from our own denominational tradition that are doing innovative work of really, for example, I often think about Redeemer, which is in the Twin Cities, and it's a Lutheran church that also has a nonprofit called Redeemer Center for Life. And they engage issues of gentrification and homelessness and really create space to generate how this movement towards advocacy and public work is connected as a response of our call as people of faith. And I think that kind of exposure and insight into how communities of faith are not just places that you go to on a Sunday morning, allows our volunteers to really expand their view of what a faith community can and I would say should be doing in terms of public life and public service. In light of that as well, I think Washington Interfaith Network is another really powerful example of how congregations mobilize themselves outside of just the Sunday morning and really gather. I mean, I've been in spaces where, and when I think of spirituality and connection with service, I think about WIN and how they organize young adults in their 20s and 30s to really come together in a room of about 800 to 1,000 people at a Unitarian church in Washington, D.C. from all facts of life, right, or all walks of life, and really saying our call to justice comes out of that inner being, inner response to what we are to be in this world. And so I think those kinds of partnerships cultivate more opportunities for volunteers to sustain their work of service, not as just something that you do because it's charitable, but because there's something that you can lean on for the long haul that allows you to do this as something that is a lifelong commitment.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity our volunteers get in doing a year of service, is to partner with a local nonprofit agency to engage that longer, the longer engagement with what systemic social justice change looks like. And to just name a couple other organizations, we, like Lutheran Immigration Refugee Service, for example, we have volunteers who are placed at their national sites in Baltimore and then local affiliates in the Twin Cities and out in California. And we also partner with Habitat for Humanity, which is a faith-based organization, and also a number of other national organizations that aren't faith-based. We've alluded to this, but for LVC, our Lutheran identity is important to who we are and what shapes our values, and that drives us toward diversity. So actually, only a third of our core volunteers identify as Lutheran, a third as other Christian, and then a third as spiritual but not religious, or many other religious affiliations. or atheist or agnostic.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is something that past core members I spoke with said they really appreciated that inclusive community and diversity. And sometimes that's a misconception. Someone might go, oh, well, I'm not religious, and so I don't qualify, but that's absolutely not the case. Drew, I guess to conclude, I know that you signed up for a service year and are actually now in your second year. You decided to extend it. And I think your experience probably really speaks to the LVC philosophy of a year of service, or in your case, 2, a lifetime of commitment. So can you talk about what made you, sign the dotted line that you wanted to continue with a second year, and how you think service will continue to play into your life?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was an undergrad, I really decided to do LVC from one of those senioritis moments of, I don't know what I want to do next, and a lot of that kind of angsty, what are my career options going to be, that I think a lot of people experience when they're finishing their education. And I really fell into LVC not knowing fully what to expect, and actually finding that for me, LVC has really kind of filled in the gaps that my education at college didn't do. Because it's a really holistic learning environment for me. It's both really great work experience. I get to go to a full-time job every day with real responsibilities, getting to work with really talented colleagues, but also then I get a programmatic aspect that says, how do you bring your full self to this job? How do you see this? How do you critically reflect on what you're doing, the good parts and the bad parts? How do you share your life with another person in different aspects? How do you see yourself as a spiritual person trying to work for justice? What's your privilege in this? All those different things. And so during my first year in LVC, I was like, I am learning so much at this time in my life. I mean, just being really challenged and stretched to try new things, to live in a new city, to live with people I didn't meet until 3 days before I was going to move in with them, and say, give it your best shot and bring your full self to the picture. And I was like, I don't want to have just 1 year of this. I really think that 2 years of this is going to be valuable and worth it. And it's actually been really critical for me in helping me decide what I want to do next. And I'm not having that angsty senior year experience of, what's going to happen? Now I really have a lot more confidence in moving forward of what I want to do with my life.
No, that makes sense. You can be a lot more intentional about it based on your experience with service. I'm full of questions, but we're going to wrap things up here. And if people have other questions, feel free to engage around the service year hashtag. We'll be sharing some highlights from this talk. You can also view this talk at a later date and head to the Lutheran Volunteer Corps website to learn more. But thank you all so much for your time, both talking about LVC and this very interesting, powerful connection between spirituality and service.
Thank you.